I'm not that old, but there's something I remember from my childhood that, in hindsight, I'm kind of surprised that I even saw that these things were even still around then. Some of you may remember them, but where I remember seeing them was at some various businesses, restaurants in particular. But you'd go into the restroom, and mounted on the wall was this metal box about like this and about that deep, sticking out off the wall. Typically they were white. Oftentimes there would be a mirror on the face of it. But hanging down from it was this looped piece of fabric that would come down about 2 or 3 feet. It was to dry your hands on. And so it was all one big loop, and so you would tug on it, and it would go back through the machine and come back out. So the premise was that you wash your hands once you have finished using the restroom, and then you go over to this, and you grab part of the towel, and you dry your hands off. And if it was a busy restaurant or a busy business, you had to kind of pull till you found a dry spot. You remember that? You ready for lunch? What amazes me about that, and recently I think it was Dan I was talking with about those things, and the first thing that amazes me is how in the world we avoided something like the bubonic plague. I mean, because having something like that is like putting a germ factory into your restaurant. It's crazy. Beyond that, I am amazed because the health department has such stringent standards that they hold, generally speaking, restaurants to. How in the world did somebody say, oh yeah, that passes inspection? If your hands weren't dirty enough, go grab that towel in there. The other thing that amazes me is that these products were sold, and that somebody was a salesman representing that company, and they would go to, for example, a restaurant owner, and they would say things like, you know, this is going to decrease the amount of trash that you have. You're not going to have to buy paper towels. You don't have to have an electrician come and install and put the wiring for one of those electric hand dryers. You can put this nasty thing up, and they'll use that, and all will be well. And they're making this sales pitch, and I'm guessing that the business owner is hearing this, and the salesman is accentuating the positives. And if that restaurant owner would have just stopped for a moment, just taken a time out and would have evaluated, they would have said, you know, that's a bad idea. Having some germ factory like that in the restaurant, that is a bad idea. But because of the slick pitch that they heard from the salesman, they went along with it. It was a bad idea. It was a bad product. But they wound up making the decision to have them. Why? Because of the influence that they received. Because of the influence that they received. You know, we've been working our way through a series that I've entitled Under the Influence. We've been talking about a variety of different angles of this particular subject. But when those nasty products were being sold, if the business owner would have just thought long enough, they would have recognized this is a bad idea. But because of the influence, they wound up purchasing those and having them installed in their restaurants. And in truth, you know, we're not that different on a regular basis, even as those that profess to be followers of Christ, because regularly we find ourselves being influenced by people that are encouraging us to do things that we know as a follower of Christ, God has said that's out of bounds. That's to cross the lines. That's wrong. You shouldn't be doing that. And too many times we will know that, yet because of the influence we are receiving from others, whether it's a classmate, whether it is a coworker, whether it's a family member, a neighbor, a friend, someone, because of their negative influence, we'll wind up doing it. If we would have just stopped long enough, we would have said, you know what? That's wrong, and I'm not. So why is it, and the question to think about today is, why is it that such negative influence is so often so successful? Why does the negative influence that we experience at work, at home, in the neighborhood, as we interact with others, why so often is that negative influence so successful? I think we see the answer today to that question in Exodus chapter 32. Exodus chapter 32, if you would look with me in your Bibles there today. We'll wind up effectively dealing with the bulk of this chapter. We're going to drop into 2 places, though, so that we can get to what's going on in the story. Exodus chapter 32, starting with verse 1. We're told when the people saw that Moses delayed in coming down from the mountain, the people gathered together to Aaron, and they said to him, "Come, make us gods that shall go before us. For as for this Moses, the man who brought us up out of the land of Egypt, we do not know what has become of him." And Aaron said to them, "Break off the golden earrings which are in the ears of your wives, your sons, your daughters, and bring them to me." So all the people broke off their golden earrings which were in their ears. They brought them to Aaron. When he received the gold from their hand, he fashioned it with an engraving tool and made a molded calf. And they said, "This is your God, O Israel, that brought you out of the land of Egypt." And when Aaron saw it, he built an altar before it. And Aaron made a proclamation and said, "Tomorrow is a feast day to the Lord." Skip down to verse 22. Moses is now confronting Aaron. And Aaron's response in verse 22 is, "Do not let the anger of my Lord become hot. You know the people, that they are set on evil. They said to me, 'Make us gods that will go before us.' As for this Moses, the man who brought us out of the land of Egypt, we don't know what has become of him." And I said to them, "Whoever has any gold, let them break it off." So they gave it to me, and I cast it into the fire, and this calf came out. All right, so what's going on is that we've got this man, Aaron. Aaron is a guy that knows what is right. He knows what God's standards are. Yet he is being influenced by other people who quite frankly knew better, but they are exerting negative influence on him. And their negative influence has an impact so that what they want him to do, he actually does, even though this violates clearly the express standards of God. How does that happen? How did that happen for him? The same way that it happens for us. And the first way is this: we yield to artificial deadlines. We yield to artificial deadlines. So that what's going on here makes sense, you need to think broader context. You recall that the Hebrews have spent 400 years as slaves in Egypt. After 400 years, God raises up this man named Moses, and you remember the whole series of plagues, and Moses is able, because of the divine work of God, he's able to lead the Hebrews out of slavery, out of Egypt, and they're headed to the Promised Land. They're headed to Canaan. They don't know exactly where it is, and so God is supernaturally guiding them. He parts the Red Sea for them to cross. He drowns Pharaoh's armies that were chasing them. He guides them by day with a cloud that hovered above them. At night, there was some light that was described as a pillar of fire that would guide them. And they're making their way to the Promised Land as God is supernaturally guiding them and using Moses as his mouthpiece to speak to them. Well, as they're making their way to Canaan, they come to this area where there's a small mountain, Mount Sinai. And they don't know it at this point, but they're going to spend 11 months there at the base of Mount Sinai. And so they stop, and the Lord has directed Moses to go up on the mountain. And we're told that this cloud descended over the mountain that was symbolic of the presence of God. And Moses had this amazing, once-in-a-lifetime, history of the world type of experience where he was able to commune directly with God. And among the things that occurred during that time while Moses was on the mountain is that God inscribed onto tablets of stone what we know as the Ten Commandments. Beyond that, he is expressing to Moses standards that he wants him to communicate to his people so that the people of God are living like the people of God. Well, Moses is up on the mountain, and he's completely unaware of what's going on down at base camp. And so that's what we read starting in verse 1 of chapter 32. We're told that the people saw that Moses delayed in coming down from the mountain. They don't know if Moses is still alive. They don't know if he's coming back. They don't know when he's coming back. They know absolutely nothing. And all they know is that he has left, and so they go to Aaron, because he's next in line in terms of leadership. He's Moses' brother. He's the number 2 guy, so we're going to go to him. And they go to Aaron, and they make a request. "Come, make us gods that will go before us." Hey, Moses, how about making us, or Aaron, how about making us something that we can worship? You know, after all, we are a people who do worship, don't we? But it's kind of been a while. So ever since we've left Egypt and we've been hanging out here at the base of this mountain, Moses is gone and we've not been worshiping, and so we really need to be doing that. We are, in fact, a people that worship. Now, I don't know where Moses is, but I remember how they used to do this back in Egypt. They had these things that they would make that they called gods, and they made those, and we can make one, and so we can worship it. We can get back to doing what we're supposed to be doing, people that are worshiping. So how about you, Aaron, making us one of these gods? Well, was this a good thing to do? Absolutely not. I mean, they're asking him to make an idol. Does Aaron know that's wrong? Sure he does. Do the people know that this is wrong? Absolutely they do. Yet they are encouraging and they are seeking to influence Aaron to do something completely wrong, something completely across the lines. And we see as the passage unfolds, they are successful in exerting this negative influence. Why is it that they were so successful? What was it that caused Aaron to respond to their encouragement? Notice again the manner in which they tighten the screws on Aaron. They say, how about making us a god? Because what do they say? As for this Moses, we do not know what has become of him. He may come back, but then again, he may not. We've been out here for quite a while, and we've been just sitting here kind of twiddling our thumbs. Again, we are, after all, a people of worship, and we haven't been doing that at all. And so what we know is what we had witnessed in Egypt, and so you can help us with that. How about doing this? Notice the foundation for their encouragement. Well, we don't know what's happened to Moses. We don't know if and when he's coming back. We need to do something now. It's as if they've taken a pocket watch and they hold it up to Aaron's ear so that he can hear the ticking as the passing of time unfolds, and they're encouraging him, hey, we've got to do something and it needs to be done now. But let me ask you this, was there any deadline? No. I mean, was there anywhere at any particular time that the people needed to be? Absolutely not. Was there anything or any reason for Aaron to do something apart from telling the people and encouraging them to wait patiently? Was there anything beyond that he should have been doing? Absolutely not. But what are they doing? It's as if they are imposing on Aaron a completely arbitrary and completely artificial deadline. Something needs to be done. It needs to be done now. This is what I think we should do, even though that was completely wrong. And Aaron yields to it. Why? Why does he succumb to this? Because he's yielding to a completely artificial deadline. How many times is it in your life thus far that you have made an ill-fated decision because someone was trying to influence you, to motivate you to do something that, quite frankly, you probably knew was wrong, but you did so because they're enhancing and focusing on and exacerbating time constraints and a deadline that really is completely arbitrary and ultimately artificial. I know I have made some of those decisions before. I remember years ago back when I was single, I had a Toyota Camry, and it wasn't, I don't know, it might have been a couple of years old at this point, and I had taken it to the dealership to get the oil changed. And once I've dropped my car off, I go sit down, but I knew that the new model year had come out. And so I decided I'm just going to walk up to the showroom part and just see in person one of the new Camrys. I go up there, and of course, if you do that, salesmen are circling like vultures, and they're like, ugh. And so one comes over to me, and I said, yeah, I was just wanting to see the new model. And he said, here, and he starts showing me all about it. And he says, do you want to drive one? Okay. So I get in this brand new car, and we go for a test drive. And I made very clear, hey, I'm not going to be buying a car today. I don't need to. Financially, that wouldn't make sense to do anything at all like that. And once we get back, though, to the dealership, he says, if we could sit down and run some numbers, he said, it may make more sense than you think. Okay. So the salesman brings over the finance guy. And the finance guy he's the deal closer there, at least at that dealership. And so the first attempt is he throws this number out before me that is, I don't know, like $1 million a month, something like that, just an obscene amount. And so, out of hand, I completely reject that. I say, no, that's entirely too much. I'm not going to do something like that. And so then he lowers it a little bit. And, yeah, we're going to see if we can cut a little bit here and cut there. And so, let's see if we can get you in maybe at this price. Even then, I knew this is still exorbitantly more than what I'm paying. That's a bad idea. And so finally, they give me this price that's still a little bit lower. And you've probably been there before where the salesman or the finance guy, it's as if they have sold their mother's tombstone to save you on this car, right? I mean, it's as if, he's had to go sell plasma so that he can help you get into this car. And so he gives me this price, and he's really sugarcoating it about what a great deal this is. And I look at that number, and there's absolutely a part of me that knows that price is too much. It's far more than what I'm paying now. I ought not be doing that. However, I also think, well, that new car sure smells good. It did drive nicely. And then this is what he does. The finance guy says, this is a deal. I can give you this deal today. He said, but I'm going to have to be leaving in about 15 minutes to go pick up my children. So that's kind of where we are today, and I don't know what the future is going to hold. So that's where we are right now. So you're going to need to decide what it is that you want to do. Okay. Dumb me signs those papers. The only benefit about that whole experience is that I did not have to pay for the oil change. I go in to get an oil change, I leave with a new car. I didn't have to pay for the oil change, but I paid dearly on that new car that I left with. Why? I knew this was a bad deal. I knew I shouldn't do this, but I wound up doing so because I was unfortunately responding to completely arbitrary deadlines. It didn't make any difference if he picked up his kids or they rode the bus home. That had no impact whatsoever on me, but I responded because he's saying the clock is ticking. We need to do something. Don't think about this. You got to go ahead and act. To those of you who have just graduated high school, many of you are going to be heading off to college, and you're going to be facing and being inundated in an environment that is void of so many positive influences that you have experienced thus far. Whether that's your parents and your family, whether it's folks here at the church, there's going to be so many positive influences that you experience now that you will not be experiencing come September. In place of that, you're going to be experiencing the impressions of and the influence of a lot of people that are going to be encouraging you to ingest things that are going to be absolutely harmful to your body, and you'll know that. They're going to be encouraging you to engage in behaviors that will destroy your character, impugn your reputation, and destroy your testimony as somebody that says they follow Christ. And one of the ways that they will approach you, and unfortunately too many times they will be successful because they will be encouraging you, do something now. You don't need to think about this, don't stop. We just need to do something, and we need to do something now. They'll be appealing to you based on completely arbitrary deadlines, and if you are foolish like Aaron, you'll yield to it. But whether you're graduating from high school and headed off to college, or finishing college, heading on the workforce, or furthering your education, or you're just going to work tomorrow. Every single one of us throughout the course of this week is going to be experiencing the influence of specific individuals and the general influence of culture, a godless culture around us. And many times they're going to be encouraging us to do something that God has made very clear you have no business doing. This ought not be a part of your life. And one of the ways in which we will be approached is through the appeal of a completely arbitrary deadline. Do something, and you'd better do it now. Don't think about it, just go ahead and do it. And if you want to fall, if you want to be under the influence of negative influence, you'll yield to those arbitrary deadlines. But there's another reason that we wind up succumbing to such negative influence, and that is that we see the short-term benefits, not the long-term costs. We see the short-term benefits, but not the long-term costs. After hearing what the people want him to do, Aaron doesn't take a time out. He doesn't really pause and think. What does he do? You see it in verse 2. He says, hey, everybody give me your earrings. So everybody's got these gold earrings, and this is before the era of costume jewelry, clearly. And so they all have these earrings made of precious metal. You bring those to me. And so he puts them into the fire, melts them all into one hunk of gold. We're told that he then takes a carving tool, and he begins to shape and mold. We don't know how big it was, but it seems that it had to be fairly small, a golden calf. Once the people see this, and this is amazing to me, Aaron has just made this golden calf. The people see this for the very first time, and notice what they say in verse 4. They say, this is like a proclamation among themselves, "This is your God, O Israel, that brought you out of the land of Egypt." What? What? This little silly golden calf. Oh yeah, that's what caused the plagues. That's what caused Pharaoh to finally say, yeah, get out of here. It was this little silly golden calf that caused the waters of the Red Sea to part. Oh, it was this little golden calf that caused the cloud to guide you during the day. It was this little tiny silly golden calf that caused that pillar of fire by night to guide you. Seriously? What were they thinking? They knew better than this. But the truth is, Aaron, the first high priest for the nation of Israel, he really knew better than this. But notice what he does in verse 5. What does he do? He builds an altar to this silly thing. Hey, let's gather some stones together. Let's erect an altar, and let's begin to offer sacrifices to this little silly golden calf. It's like me just taking, here's my keys. Behold your God, and let's go ahead and build an altar and worship that. It blows my mind that they're doing this. The people knew better. Aaron clearly knew better, but they're doing this. How in the world did Aaron, the first high priest of the nation of Israel, how does he wind up succumbing to such negative influence? Because I believe he was looking only at short-term benefits, not long-term costs. Well, what short-term benefits were there to be gained? I believe what was going on is that as they have come to him, and it sounds like, based on context, this wasn't just a couple of people that came to Aaron. It seems as though they're coming en masse, maybe multiplied hundreds. And they're saying, hey, we represent thousands more. And this is what we need to do. Aaron, the clock is ticking. We've got to do something. We don't know if and when Moses is ever going to come back. We'd better do something, and we'd better do something now. And the implication is that if Aaron does not do this, there's going to be trouble. It may be perhaps that the people rebel. They revolt against Aaron's leadership, against Moses' leadership. Maybe they just begin to scatter and everybody each goes their own way, and the promised land, that whole bit never ever happens. And I believe Aaron was thinking, if he even thought there for a moment, if I do this, at least I can squelch things. I can ramp them back down. Kind of appease people so that we'll stay together. We can keep everybody here. And then we can kind of pick up and go on. And people won't rebel. They won't wander off. And so he does this. Not only does he fashion this golden calf, not only does he build an altar to it, but notice what is said at the end of verse 5. Hey, we're going to worship this thing, but then, oh, by the way, tomorrow is a feast day to the Lord. So we're going to worship this silly little thing today and say, oh, this is what brought us out of Egypt. But tomorrow, oh, yeah, we're going to be back to worshiping the Lord, and we'll have a feast to celebrate Him tomorrow. But today, and maybe the day after that, then we'll be worshiping this silly little golden calf. Well, how did this happen? Well, it's because Aaron is responding, succumbing to negative influence. In his mind, I believe he thought, I shouldn't do this, but if I don't, what might the people do? Aaron was thinking consequences, but the only consequences he was thinking were completely short-term. He wasn't thinking about what might happen in a day or two, in a week or two. Well, what was going to happen because of Aaron's activity is that God was going to tell Moses, you better get back down. Moses comes down and he sees what is going on, and he is absolutely incensed. He's furious about this. And what Moses' orders is that the Levites, the priests, are to draw their swords, and they killed 3,000 Hebrews in that single day. There were wives who lost their husbands, mothers who lost their sons, men who lost their brothers. Aaron was going to lose 2 of his own sons because of this. But he couldn't see any of that. All he could see was, hey, if I do this, then the people will be quiet. I can get things tamped back down. He's thinking short-term benefit, not long-term consequence. But isn't that exactly how sin works? I mean, consistently, that's how it works. We see, oh, I can get something that I want, and I can have it now. And we think just about satisfying that desire or obtaining that temporary pleasure, but we don't think at all big picture. And sometimes that picture doesn't have to get very big. It can be just a day later, a week later, a month later. We're not thinking long-term consequences. Aaron was exactly not thinking long-term consequences. And so he yielded to this negative influence. I had a couple come to me while I was pastoring in Charlotte, and they asked me to officiate at their wedding, and I told them that I would consider that, but one of the things, and I share this with any couple that comes to me, one of the things that I require is a series of premarital counseling sessions, and we set it up for within the next couple of days to have the first one. And so they sat down with me in my office, and I began to ask a series of questions. I don't know them very well at all, and I've never met him before, and just ask some basic stuff, kind of where they came from, how it was they met, how long they've been together, that type of thing. Tell me about your relationship. And one of the questions that I asked, though, was, have either of you been married before? Well, the bride said, no, this is going to be her first marriage. The groom, however, has been married twice before. So at that point, I began to ask some follow-up questions. I said, well, tell me about what brought about the end of those relationships. Why did you wind up divorcing? And he said, we just fell out of love. So a reasonable follow-up question, because I want the bride to hear this, I said, what's going to be different with number 3? And I promise you this was his answer. Because I love her. So strike 1 and 2, we fell out of love. But number 3, oh, this is going to work because I love her. And she's hearing this. And I'm thinking, if red flags are not going up, they should be. I ask another question, a pretty important one. When is the wedding planned? 2 weeks from that day. Or within 2 weeks, the wedding was to take place. At this point, I expressed to them, I said, I'll be honest with you, I cannot in good conscience officiate at this wedding. I said, it's consequential to me that I stand not simply before you and your family and friends, but I stand before God asking His blessings on something like this, and I do not feel comfortable whatsoever in being able to do that. I believe that what needs to take place, and I direct these words specifically to the bride, I really think that you need to put a pause on things. And I'm not saying that you have to cancel this, but I'm saying that you need to put the brakes on, and there's some things that need to be worked through if you want to be able to have a successful marriage. Her response to me was this: well, we've already got the caterer booked, and we've already paid money, and the invitations have already gone out, and we've already paid for the venue, and so if we don't go through with this, then I'm going to lose money to the caterer, those invitations will have gone to waste, and we'll lose the money on the deposit and not get the date that we wanted. Incidentally, they were getting married in a barn, but that's a little tidbit. And I'm thinking, what? Because the caterer may not be happy, and it may cost you a little bit of money, because those that own the venue may not be thrilled about this, and you lose a little bit of money because some invitations will have been sent out, and you may lose a little bit of money. You're going to go through with this. And it turns out that they did go through with this a couple of weeks later without my involvement, and certainly against my caution. It did not have a fairy tale ending, however. A short time later, she is pregnant, and they have a little girl. And this man that said, I love her, well, he decided, I'd like to abuse her. I'd like to physically and verbally abuse her. I'd like to drink so much that I'm acting out of my mind. And that marriage, like so many, winds up on the ash heap of history, ending in divorce, broken family. Why? because all that bride could see was short-term benefit. I'd rather not upset a caterer and a venue owner and potential guests. I'm going to go through with this. And she did, not thinking at all about long-term costs. Listen, so many times we will wind up yielding and falling and succumbing to negative influence because these arbitrary deadlines are imposed upon us, and people are saying the clock is ticking, you got to do something now. And as we're thinking here and now, I better do something, and all we can see at the moment is the short-term gain, but we do not see the long-term cost. For Aaron, it's going to cost him the lives of his own 2 sons. But he can't see that, and he falls. But there's one final reason we see in this passage that he, and likewise so many times we, yield to negative influence, and that is we think the buck can be passed. We think the buck can be passed. All right, so Aaron has done what was asked of him. They've influenced him. They said, hey, how about building us a god? And he does it. He gets the earrings, fashions this golden calf. They begin to worship it. They've got this altar erected for it, and he's part and parcel of the entire process. This could not have happened at all without Aaron. Meanwhile, Moses is up on the mountain. The cloud, symbolic of the presence of God, is still hovering over the mountain. Moses is completely oblivious to what's going on, but God is not, and he tells Moses, you'd better get down this mountain. And so Moses comes down, and he is aghast at what he sees. I mean, here he has been encountering the God of the universe. And God has etched onto tablets the commandments and given specific instructions. He's having this amazing encounter with God while the people that are supposed to be God's people are worshiping a little silly golden calf. He's furious. He comes down. He's holding these tablets containing the 10 Commandments, and he is so mad he flings them to the ground, and the tablets that God has crafted are broken. Moses is incensed, and he goes to Aaron, and the question is, why in the world is this going on? Why are you permitting such a thing? Verse 22, Aaron says, don't let the anger of my Lord become hot. Easy, Moses. Deep breaths, deep breaths. There's an explanation. And look at his explanation. You know the people that they are set on evil. You know this bunch of folks. Whiners and complainers that just, they don't have the sense God gave a mule, and they're just set on doing bad stuff. You know how they are. And so that they come to me one day and they're like, hey, we don't know what's going to happen if Moses is coming back or not. So, we need something to worship, so how about you making something? And, reluctantly, it was so many of them, reluctantly though, I said, okay, give me your earrings. And so I took all that gold, I put it into the fire, and I love this. You see at the end of verse 24, I cast it into the fire, and this calf just came out. It's like a Gomer Pyle, Shazam. Golly, look at that. It's I don't know. I just threw the earrings in there, and this little calf just walks right on out, made of gold. Now, what is Aaron doing? He's shirking the responsibility. First of all, he says it's the people's fault, and then he even blames the fire, doesn't he? Sure he does. It seems that Aaron thought for a very short time about this whole encouragement, about this, what they were influencing him to do. And as he thought through this, even for those few moments, I believe one of the thoughts that occurred to Aaron was this. I'm like the people. I don't know if and when Moses is coming back. This shouldn't be done, but the people are encouraging me, and if I don't do it, there's going to be some adverse consequences. So I may go ahead and do this. But if Moses comes back and catches me in this, I know. I can say it's their fault. They're the ones that were encouraging me to do this, and I just put the stuff in the fire, and this calf just kind of came out. So that'll be my ticket, and I'll be okay. I can pass the buck. I can shirk the responsibility. Passing the buck is a phrase that you and I have heard throughout the course of our lives. We're familiar with it. It's become cliche. You understand when someone uses that phrase what it means. But like so many other phrases that have crept into American English, a lot of these phrases have origins. And I wondered where that phrase came from. So I did a little bit of digging, and it turns out that by the mid-1800s, poker had become a very popular game here in the United States, especially out west. Lots of guys away from family as they're experiencing the westward expansion and development. Poker becomes a very popular game to play. A lot of times in these poker games, big money was at stake. And so if big money, your money is on the line, you're concerned about the prospect of someone cheating. And they realized that one of the ways to prevent cheating is to make sure that one person is not the dealer all the time. And so that whoever is dealing, that passes among the various players. And so that they could identify whose turn it was to be the dealer, they would use a marker. What apparently originally was the marker is that somebody would just pull out their knife and they would set that on the table, and that was the marker. Oftentimes these knives, you had that steel blade, but then the handle was created out of a buck's horn. And so this marker, this knife, in time became known as the buck. Once you have dealt the cards, when it's time for the next person, you move the marker, you move the buck to the next person. If, however, for some reason you cannot or do not want to deal, do you know what you would do? You would pass the buck. If you don't want the responsibility, you would just pass it on to someone else. That's exactly what Aaron is doing, isn't it? He's passing the buck. I don't want the responsibility of this. Moses, you know these people. They're bent on doing evil. And this fire, crazy things. It's fire's fault. He is passing the buck. I don't want the responsibility for this, and so I will cast that responsibility. I will pass that buck on to the fire and to these awful people. It's their fault. Well, it didn't work for Aaron. And you know what? It has never worked. Because, quite frankly, this is a timeless pattern that we see. Do you remember in the opening chapters of Genesis when Adam and Eve have eaten of the forbidden fruit? When God comes to confront them, He starts with Adam. He's like, why have you done this? You remember what Adam's response was? It was that woman that you gave me. I'm blaming Eve, and indirectly I'm blaming you. Did it work for Adam? Nope. Did it work for Aaron? Nope. Is it going to work for you? Is it going to work for me? Not at all. Why? Because God operates on this premise: personal accountability. I am responsible before Him, and I will give account to Him as you will give account to Him for what you have chosen to do. Yeah, he was influenced, but ultimately he made the choice. You have been influenced, as I have, to do things that God has forbidden, and it's not my friend's fault. It's not family's fault. It's not co-workers or classmates' fault. Ultimately, I made the choice. But too many times we do so thinking, you know what, something's got to be done. There's these arbitrary deadlines. Something's got to be done. We're seeing just the short-term benefits, not thinking the long-term consequences. And when push comes to shove, we think that if for some reason there is an adverse consequence, we can shift the weight of that responsibility to others if we just simply do not want it. It didn't work for them, and it's not going to work for me, and it's not going to work for you. So where does this leave us? What am I asking you to do today? I'm asking you to decide, first of all, a very simple thought, that you do not want to succumb, that you do not want to yield to negative influence. Pretty basic thing. Any person that professes to be a follower of God ought to be able to say, you know what, I don't want to be yielding and stumbling and falling under negative influence. But I want you to go beyond that and say, not only do I have that as my desire, I so desire it, I want to recognize my abilities are limited, but His are not, and I want His help. Will you ask the Lord to help you to withstand as the influence comes? Moses, he didn't have any idea this was going on. But God knew. Aaron knew. Aaron stumbled and he fell, and he paid the price. Why does the Lord want us to hear this today? Because He doesn't want the same thing for you. Will you bow your heads with me? Is it true for you that you do not, sincerely, that you do not want to yield and succumb to negative influence? Is it really true that you want to stand firm as somebody that's a committed follower of Christ? That you really do want to do things God's ways and to maintain His standards? That's question number one. If the answer to that is yes, my follow-up is, how well have you been doing it? And have you been trying to do it on your own? Have you been asking for God's help? Do you need to ask it again today? Maybe whether it's in your pew or in this altar, you just need to say, Lord, I need your help because I'm certainly not batting 1,000. And this influence is coming from 1,000 different directions, and I want to be able to stand firm. Maybe you're here today and you've heard us sing and we've talked about and alluded to this idea of having a personal relationship with God, and you don't know how that can be experienced. You don't even know if it's possible, but you'd like to find out more. Will you do something? Here in just a moment, we're going to have a time of invitation. Will you leave where you are and just come share that with me? And I promise you, no one will make you feel a bit awkward or uncomfortable. There's no reason to be embarrassed. But I can begin a conversation with you, and I can give you as much time as you want or need so that you can experience what so many in this room already have. Maybe God's prompting you to become a part of this church family, or there's just something you came into this place with today that you want to talk to God about. Maybe it is that you recognize there's someone close to you that you love that is losing in this battle against negative influence, and you want to pray that God will help you fortify and strengthen them to bolster their stand. There's something you just want to talk to God about. This is your opportunity. This is your chance. Thank you, Lord, for the record that you have preserved for us. And you've done so to help us understand just how high the stakes are. Yeah, sin always has generally some short-term benefits, but it has long-term costs that are always far, far greater. And Lord, as we've seen how it shouldn't be done, I believe you've shown us how it should be done. And I pray that we are coming to you en masse, saying, Lord, I need you. I'm asking for your help because I want to stand. I want to stand for my good. I want to stand for your sake. God, as you have and are speaking to us, I pray, God, that we respond with faith and obedience. We ask this of you in Christ's name. Amen. I'm going to ask if you would to stand as Tom and our praise team lead us in the hymn of invitation. As God has spoken to you and prompting you to make a decision, I hope that you'll take this time to follow Him.
Nothing good in me. You are love on display for all to see. You are light when the darkness closes in. You are hope, you have covered all my sin. You are peace, when my fear is crippling. You are true, even in my wandering. You are joy, you're the reason that I sing. You are life, in you death has lost its sting.